I come from a long line of preachers. So if you give me 18 minutes to talk about something in relation to which I am completely evangelical, you're going to get a sermon, at least in form. I'm going to begin with a text, I'm going to continue with a story, and I'm going to finish with a lesson. The text comes from the German poet Rilke. He has a series of poems called Sonnets to Orpheus. And the third of those poems is addressed directly to the mythical father of music, almost as if Orpheus were musical power personified. And this is what it says. Singing as you teach it is not desire, not suing for a thing in the end attained. Singing is existence. I'd like to hang that verse as a banner over everything I'm about to say, and I would like to promise to you that when it comes time for the lesson, I'll come back to it. The story I want to tell is the story of the founding of a group called the Phoenix Community Choir, a group consisting of homeless and at-risk youth, of social workers and administrators from an organization called Phoenix Youth Programs based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and community volunteers. I've been thinking lately that my story has both an abstract and a concrete beginning. The abstract beginning is rooted in my family. My brother Tim is the executive director of Phoenix Youth Programs. In the spring of 2010, he heard a performance of our Bishop's University singers. And he got the idea of building a choir in the Phoenix community. He then relentlessly hectored me and dozens of other people until we agreed to try to bring that idea to life. That's the abstract beginning. The concrete beginning came almost a year later in April of 2011. It happened in a room in a small apartment in a housing project called Mulgrave Park in Halifax. I'd come to Halifax to help Tim stump for this idea of a choir. And frankly, it wasn't going very well. We'd met numerous people connected to the Phoenix organization, and the reception that we had gotten for the idea of a choir was tepid, to say the least. But here in Mulgrave Park, in this little room, about 30 or 35 people had gathered to hear us make our proposal for the choir. So Tim gave a talk. And at the end, he asked me to play something on a little electric piano that we had brought along, just in order to show people the kind of thing that you do in a choir. I launched into a version of the Beatles' Let It Be, thinking that, I was going to give a performance for the audience gathered in the room. 2 bars in, the entire room burst into song. We were led by women of a certain age who sang without reserve from the bottom of their hearts. And suddenly that little room was filled with the indomitable spirit of the Mulgrave Park community, a spirit which had endured somehow undiminished through decades of disappointment and challenge and poverty. Despite everything, those people wanted to sing. That was the concrete beginning. I can remember thinking to myself, somehow we have to live up to that voice. Flash forward 4 months. All summer long, the Phoenix people in Halifax work hard promoting the idea of the choir. Here in Lennoxville, our team, under the direction of my partner Fanny Gaudette, plan a series of collaborative concerts with the newly formed group. We pick dates at the end of November. We book 2 nights in Centennial Theatre, 2 nights in a theater in Halifax. Finally, and most importantly, By the time my colleague Simon Abbott and I show up in Halifax on the last day of August 2011, 40 people have agreed with various degrees of trepidation to audition for the Phoenix Community Choir. We took every single one of them. And the practices began in the first week of September. I could tell so many stories about the rehearsal period that followed. In retrospect, the challenges were almost comically daunting. Virtually nobody in Halifax had any previous choral experience. Virtually nobody read music. Virtually all of the kids involved had unbelievably tumultuous lives, which continued to unfold in unbelievably tumultuous ways. And yet, almost from the beginning, it was clear that music was working its magic. About 2 weeks after rehearsals began, one of the girls, who often seemed to me to be sullen and withdrawn, came up after a practice and in a tone of great urgency said to me, "How are we going to keep this thing going?" And I can remember thinking, look, let's get through one concert. But in spite of her behavior, something was getting into her. Then about a week after that, we were practicing one of the arrangements of a spiritual that we were going to do in the concert. It called for the choir to hold a chord on the syllable oo for 4 bars at the beginning. And as we were singing through those 4 bars, it occurred to me to say something to Simon, who was accompanying us on the piano. And whatever I said to him threw his count off. He added an extra bar. In front of me was the youngest member of the group, a guy of about maybe 12 or 13. Absolutely no previous musical experience, and to all appearances unable to sit still or even pay attention for 5 seconds. The minute we violated the time count, he chirped at me, "There's too many oohs." In spite of his behavior, something was getting into him. And then finally, about 2 days before opening, we had our first joint rehearsal with the Bishop's University singers. And after that rehearsal, the Phoenix people gathered at their hotel, and one of the guys, very tough customer, said to the others, "Man, that other choir's good. We've got to step it up." Less than 3 months after the birth of that fledgling little organization, something like pride and loyalty had begun to get into him, along with a recipe for expressing those things. Step it up! Raise your voice. By the time they hit the stage 2 days later, there was no doubt in my mind that the others had bought what he was selling. They came and they brought a level of energy and spirit that humbles me to this day. I wanted to have just an idea of what that energy and spirit was like. So we want to play a little clip. It's the final 2 choruses of the final song of the final concert in Halifax. The song is called "Pressin' On." It's by Bob Dylan. Watch for the spirit and the energy. At a certain point, it is so profound that I am lifted literally off my feet. Could you roll the clip, Scott?
You gotta keep pushing.
Two things above all stay with me from that performance. One, the energy in people's bodies. And two, the shining faces, as if they'd seen a miracle, as if they'd achieved some kind of miraculous understanding. And you know, ever since that night, I've been trying to work out for myself some kind of provisional genealogy of that miracle. So I'd like to share with you what I've got to this point. And here we are at the lesson. It comes in 3 parts. Begin with this. We have a raft of expressions in our English language for negative or utilitarian relations to time. We waste time, we make time, we lose time, we save time. If we're completely alienated or disengaged from what we're doing, we kill time. The expressions we have for cherishing time, though, they're a lot harder to come by. If I had to reinvent the English language all over again from scratch, I'd be very tempted by the locution keeping time. As it is, of course, it has other meanings, one of which is related to music. But stay with the idea. There are moments in our lives where we cherish time, and they are the best moments. They're the moments in which we feel most engaged in what we're doing. The moments where we feel most at home in the world. It seems to me, looking back now, that the front end of the Phoenix Community Choir miracle is something like an alteration in our relation to time. From killing it to keeping it, both in the musical sense and in the existential sense. If someone says to me, how are we going to keep this thing going? She is already entertaining the possibility of cherishing the future. If someone says to me, there's too many yous, in other words, you're not paying proper attention to the very thing that's unfolding in front of you, he is already entertaining the possibility of cherishing the present. If someone says to me, that other choir is good, we've got to step it up, he is already on the verge of acknowledging that work undertaken in collaboration with others has a kind of dignity and a kind of value that needs to be supported and defended. The front end of the miracle is something like an alteration in our relation to time. The future, the present, and the past mean something somehow. What's the source of that alteration? Well, it seems to have its roots in something like responsiveness. The promise of the future, the reality of the present, the dignity of the past have spoken to us somehow, and we find ourselves having answered. The address, in the cases that I just described, but I also think just generally, doesn't take the form of a discursive argument. It's something more like an invitation. And the invitation doesn't, at least initially, come from a person or from a group of people. It's something more like the property of a situation. In a way, it's always worlds that we find inviting. And when we respond to that invitation, we don't do so by making speeches about those worlds, but by, however tentatively, however timidly, giving ourselves to them. Here's a paradox, but I think it's true of human life. You find yourself, you recognize who you are, you become who you are by giving yourself. How does that paradox work itself out in the little world of the choir? You give yourself, you raise your voice. And when you do, you see suddenly something of the complex relationship that holds between individuals and communities. You see, for example, that your voice matters. That the song, no matter how beautiful it is, comes to life only in the voices of those who respond to its invitation. You see, by the same token, that no single voice can bear the burden of the choir's responsibility. You have to grant to others the possibility of rising up into the dignity of response. And finally, and most beautifully, you see that the work of responding doesn't wear you down and use you up the way you're worn down and used up in alienated labor. Bringing the song to life also brings you to life. And so now I ask myself, what is the source of that awesome symmetry? And in the context of this talk, at least, the answer has to be music. Music itself. It's music that brings you to life. Now it's time for Rilke again, eh? Remember what he says. Singing, as you teach it, music, is not desire, not suing for a thing in the end attained. Singing is existence. Music brings us to life. When I say that, I don't mean it figuratively. Of course, it's true that music enlivens us, that it has the power to shape our emotions, that it gets into us so deeply sometimes that it feels like our own heartbeat. Of course, all of that's true. But when I say music brings us to life, I mean it literally. I mean it in the sense of Rilke's bold pronouncement. Music sets in front of us. Music gathers us into the deepest secret of life. The thing that has animated the canonical works of the Western tradition across all disciplines, from the book of Job to the origin of the species. Life at bottom, existence at bottom, is indomitable affirmation. Singing as a possibility of the human voice rising up out of music. Singing as mythologized in the figure of Orpheus is the cherishing and blessing of life itself. Both in the sense that we cherish and bless it just by raising our voices, and in the even deeper sense that there is a cherishing and a blessing that belongs to existence itself. Here I think we come to the heart of the Phoenix Community Choir miracle. Phoenix Youth Programs works hard every day battling against the material consequences of poverty and homelessness. But those problems aren't simply material problems. They bleed also into the realm of the spirit. They tempt us to cynicism and despair and the view that life consists in killing time. Music won't put a roof over your head, but it addresses directly the spiritual consequences of poverty and homelessness by gathering us into the mighty, sheltering, accommodating affirmation of existence itself. I say accommodating affirmation, but you know, in the end, I think that's almost redundant. Because in the realm of the spirit, affirmation is accommodation. Thank you.